Well, he's no longer involved directly in politics, but as CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association, you can bet that Tim Hudak pays close attention to what happens provincially as well as regionally. We welcome Mr. Hudak for a post-election breakdown of how things shook down Monday. Tim, again, pathetically low voter turnout across the province. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I don't think there's a huge mandate for change. I mean, we saw the vast majority of the mayors reelected, the vast majority of the councillors, and that wasn't just in Niagara. That was pretty much province-wide. Now, there were some exceptions. You had big races in Hamilton and Ottawa, and that drove up voter turnout. But, my view on this generally is, number one, if voter turnout is low, it's probably because there's generally satisfaction, and they're not looking for change, not a compelling race, the top of the ticket to get people out. And you want my conspiracy theory as well, Mike?
Sure, let's hear it.
I'm not sure those voter lists are as accurate as they used to be in the good old days when somebody knocked on your door and registered you, right? I could be wrong, but I remember in my last few campaigns, canvassing, knocking on doors, and some homes would have 3 or 4 names at the house. They had lived there in the last few years, but they weren't there for that election. So I'm not completely sure it's an apples to apples comparison. But the main driver here is there just weren't races that got people excited. There is satisfaction largely with the leadership of the Niagara Peninsula.
Tim, you're a former Conservative Party leader in Ontario. We saw 3 party leaders, former party leaders, running for mayor's seats. Patrick Brown, successful in Brampton, Andrea Horwath in Hamilton, and we also saw Stephen Del Duca running in Vaughan. What would possess a party leader, someone with provincial experience, to throw their hat in the ring?
It's an addiction. It gets in your blood. It's hard to shake. I'm having some fun there, but it is an exhilarating sport, if you will. And you compare it to sports, is sometimes pro athletes stay a little longer than is needed, and others still have things to offer on a brand new team, and that's up to the voters to decide. Certainly, Jim Bradley is a good example, right? He lost in the 2018 provincial election, but was resoundingly supported then, became regional chair. I think did a heck of a job as Niagara's regional chair, and was the top vote getter for regional council in St. Catharines. So, I think people will have a profile. They'll have a calling. We can have fun with politicians, but I can tell you, number one, like the vast majority are actually human beings. You might not believe me, but they actually are human beings. And number two, they tend to have a calling to make a difference. Whether that's making a major difference for the province, for the country as a whole, or your hometown is always very close to your heart. That's the way it was with Jim Bradley in St. Kitts, and that's the way it was with Andrea Horwath in Hamilton. And voters said, you know what? We want them to continue to serve, just with a different jersey on.
When you look at an area that's very close to your hometown, where you live, West Lincoln, a very controversial mayor, and he was voted out. That was probably the most contentious of the races here in Niagara.
A couple lessons reinforced with me in this most recent race. And let me say off the top too, Mike, I just want to, commend all of those people who did run for mayor, regional council, trustee, or local council, because like anybody can whine and complain. Anybody can sit there on their lazy boy or the bar stool and say they can do better, but it actually takes some guts to raise your hand, to step forward and try to make a difference. So I really respect the fact that they did that. And number two, when you're in municipal politics, it's a full-time job, really, right? You're always on. Provincial or federal level, you can sort of disappear into the big city and have some privacy and be anonymous. When you're in your hometown, you're always at work or at the grocery store, filling up your car with gas or mowing your lawn. So I commend them. So one of the top lessons I talked about already, that hard work does pay off. I think that the COVID crisis was a bit of a crucible, as a testing ground for leadership. Most people passed, some people failed. People also like to see that you stick to your knitting. So we had a couple of cases where municipal politicians got too involved in the COVID controversy. They're out there talking about vaccines and protests and not focusing on why they were elected. And I think Dave Balsom was part of that in West Lincoln. Cheryl Gannon certainly won by a significant margin. I just think the voters of West Lincoln, including myself, I live in that community. I won't tell you who I voted for, but they saw that there was too much distraction and voted for change in that township.
Let's talk about real estate, because we know that housing is in a crisis, especially here in Southern Ontario. Big announcement by the government to speed up the development process. You and your members must be pretty happy about that.
Yeah, I think this is bold legislation. It is probably the most comprehensive approach to making sure that average, hardworking Canadians can find a place that they can afford to buy. Look, I mean, if you grew up like I did in Fort Erie, you live in St. Catharines or West Lincoln, where my home is today, you always thought that if you played by the rules, you saved up a few bucks, you got your degree, diploma, and a good job, you could at least get a home in the neighborhood you grew up in. But that's not the case in Niagara today. It's really hard to find that starter home or even the move up home when the kids come along. So that calls for bold action. I really like that the government has done a number of things to take away the tactics that NIMBY forces use to try to drive costs projects up, delay them, or cancel them altogether. It will help reduce the charges that go into the cost of building a home. Well, not Niagara. Some places like York Region, Mike, the cost is $150,000 in fees and permits before you put a spade in the ground. And who pays for that? It's a first-time buyer. The other thing I like in this is that it's going to set targets for municipalities to achieve. If a municipality hits that target, say 20,000 homes over the next 5 years, they should get rewarded. They get their arena project, the new road, the new bridge. But if they say no to all development, they don't want new homes, they don't want their young people to stay there, well, their projects will go to the bottom of the list.
Tim, thank you so much for your perspective on that and the election. Pleasure to catch up with you again.
My pleasure. Good seeing you. Thanks for having me on, Mike.